Good afternoon and welcome to the final Connex Portal LinkedIn Live of this series. I know all good things have got to come to an end, but rest assured we will be back with a new series soon. Now, before I start the introductions, I'd like to give a big shout out to Adam Payne from Factory IQ. He's been our host master for this series and the previous one. Adam is an amazing guy with a huge wealth of knowledge and experience within manufacturing and certainly worth connecting with. So thanks, Adam, for all you've done for us in this and the last series.
No problem whatsoever. No problem at all.
Right, so today I'm pleased to welcome John Henderson from Sarah Penrose Limited, who will be discussing the importance of people in the workplace and how the blend of technical and fundamental human skills determines the success of a business. Also joining us today is David Brassington, an independent consultant from DCB Services, Steve Murphy, a continuous improvement consultant, and Tolu Ajayi from Connex Portal. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
So, John, fundamental human skills. One might say we have them, we all have them, but can they be improved?
Well, that's a cracking introduction, so thank you for that. And I really appreciate being invited today by Connex to talk. Thanks to Angela and Adam for all their efforts behind the scenes as well. So the good news is I'm only going to cover 4 points. So if anyone's sort of thinking about putting their feet up and having a snooze, hopefully that won't detract from that. And anybody watching in black and white, this shirt has got horrendous colours on it. So unfortunately, you're going to have to just put up with that as it goes through. But I didn't think about that before I got myself ready this morning, but never mind. So I'm John Henderson. I'm co-founder and director of Sarah Penrose Limited. And I'm going to jump straight into Angela's point about the idea of fundamental human skills. And I guess the first point is we can all be better. It's a very simple concept, but I am surrounded by a local industry, i.e. Formula One, in Northamptonshire, where the focus is about trying to squeeze to get that little bit of improvement in terms of agility or speed or performance from vehicles. And that small gaps, those small elements make all the difference. So that's an established part of elite sports in terms of how we think. So that really leads on to the idea of improving business capability through the skills of your people. And that's fundamentally where I want to start off. I think it's also important to say that this is not a teaching people to suck eggs idea. I think, as we said, we can all think, but we can certainly improve what we do. Hence, we can all be better. So the second point is that people are very much at the heart of the manufacturing process. And I think if we dig into what's taking place, we can see that a lot of the problems and opportunities are often people related. I think we take the idea, for example, of innovation versus it's always been done like that. So innovation very much is as simple as trying to make things better, improve processes, but there's a degree of resistance, there's a degree of habit, a degree of culture, and that ultimately creates a bit of a challenge. I think when we look at the introduction of systems, new systems, often the theme for why they don't necessarily perform the way that it's anticipated comes down to the fact that often the people element of things is not being taken into consideration, and therefore there's issues with embedding of technology and embedding of process. So I think when we talk about this idea of comfort versus change, this idea of silos and funnels, and I think change and what culture means for a business is always going to be a challenge. So this idea that people are somehow invisible from the manufacturing process seems to be a real interesting observation that I've noticed in the time that I've spent looking at it. I think when we consider technical skills currently have a shelf life of 3 years. And I think central to my thoughts certainly is we're comfortable with the idea of optimizing machines. We're comfortable with the idea of optimizing systems. That's a fundamental piece of what we do in manufacturing. So why would we not extend that to people through the skills that they demonstrate and the skills that they are specialists in? I think when we look at also any manufacturing terminology, we'll always see the fact that anything to do with waste is always something that people are very keen to remove. and not getting the best out of a workforce by optimizing through the skills is certainly an area where is a waste, which ultimately needs some focus to try and remove. We've got three major issues at the moment, which is recruitment, retention, engagement in the sector, and I think one of the main reasons why people leave businesses is down to the lack of development and career opportunities. But certainly, that is an ongoing challenge, and again, people play a pivotal role in the manufacturing process. And if we look at some statistics, on average, it's from government stats. On average, it's costs or 3K is spent per year per recruiting somebody, whereas the average spend per employee on training is 1.5K. So somewhere on the lines here, we're saying basically that recruitment is more important than retention in some respects, by the fact that we're not prepared to look at what we do for training, and the numbers don't quite necessarily stack up. The third point really is to look at the idea of fundamental human skills concentrates on skills, not necessarily behaviour. It centres around three areas of critical thinking, lateral thinking, and problem solving. And the critical thinking is really about identifying the value in something and being able to communicate that and make the appropriate decisions. The lateral thinking is all about introducing curiosity and imagination, and the idea of thinking differently about something, unconventionally, thinking outside the box, if you will. And the final component is the problem solving, which is all bringing that all together and coming up with measurable, controllable ways of delivering the actions in line with the objectives of the business. What is interesting is that those particular areas those particular skills are transferable, and certainly for life, whereas, again, back to the technical skills piece, technical skills constantly need to be updated. These particular skills have been the same since the dawn of time, regardless of technology, because they're about the use of more of the attributes that are associated with humans rather than technology. They're also measurable in the sense that because their skills are not necessarily behaviour based, we can break that down into have they been demonstrated, have they not been demonstrated, and we can show improvement by the focus of what we talk about, what we do. What is interesting is that Harvard University did a study recently where a production line had invested in problem-solving skills for the people on that line, and they saw a 12% increase in productivity. So there were various different figures floating around, but the ability for people to be more effective, to deal with the information they've got to deal with, problem solve, etc., means that ultimately productivity can be improved as a result. And what is very interesting is that if we want a high value and dynamic economy, then we need the appropriate skill sets. Moving away from probably more repetitive to more value-added activities. If we think about automation, we're going through a bit of a wave of redeployment. So typically we're seeing Sue move from the assembly line to QA, or Kevin from forklift to systems analyst. This is a different set of skills and is in line with is maximising the value of outputs from production. So the fourth and final point is that we've got a bit of a conundrum here, in the sense that if innovation is seen as critical to growth and change, what's is coming through from Make UK is that 72% of manufacturers rate innovation as the most important skill to have, yet 80% of them have no plans to or strategy for how that's to be trained or to be developed. So we're looking to want to create this idea of a high value, high wage economy, if you like, but then we're not necessarily delivering that in terms of activities on the ground. And I think ultimately the idea of fundamental human skills is really about not necessarily innovation skills, but learning the principles behind it. Because we can take innovation back to first principles by looking at curiosity, imagination, experimentation, and build it back up again, so we can learn the principle behind innovation, the principle behind the new, the unconventional, the different, rather than, for example, focusing on a very technical solution. And all of these things are measurable and applicable. So I think ultimately there is opportunity for us to move things forward and develop a better, higher value manufacturing sector.
Well, it seems quite interesting, actually. I'd like to bring David in at this point. Cool. David, what's your experience of this?
I was just thinking that. Thank you, Angela. And I was wondering, John, whether you see massive differences between, say, new tech companies and old traditional manufacturers in their attitude to innovation.
Well, I think there's always a danger of what are the principles behind that. You know, what's the basis? Because if we talk about innovation, I think there's a lot of hijacking of the word to mean, you know, modern tech, etc. Whereas, of course, ultimately it's about doing things better. So I think it comes back down to the principles of it. I think, you know, I speak from my own experience of logistics, in the sense a lot of tech companies are coming to logistics, but I'll be blunt, they don't understand the principle of logistics. So, you know, the technology is great, but, you know, we still need to deliver something. So I think it comes back down to practice rather than technology. What's the approach? You know, we want to really, the human aspect should drive the system rather than the other way around, in my experience.
Thank you.
Sure.
Steve, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on this.
And give one particular example where it was a big American company, and the American companies do mass surveys of their staff to see what their staff think. And the particular company, I think, had for a total of 7 years that nobody really thought a great deal of the management, and nobody thought a great deal of the senior management. They didn't even think a great deal of the junior management. And for practical purposes, in terms of the mechanics of the company, the managers did a good job. They managed holidays, they did return to works, setting out tasks and things like that. You know, there wasn't. So basically, one of the senior Six Sigma people and a whole group of us got together to sort of look into this. And when we sort of analysed it and said, well, what is missing? It really was the lack of the basic managements, the basic human skills that John is talking about weren't being developed by the company. So the solution is that they actually got some local trainers in to take all the management through these basic things. And basically, for practical purposes, I thought that they taught the managers how to be good Boy Scout patrol leaders, you know. But that is not an experience that everybody has. So if you know, it seems like common sense, a lot of it, you know. But if you've never had that experience, if you've never been stuck on Mamtor on a dark night and had to work out how you get 6 people off without leaving the smallest behind, you know, then you've probably never had to do it. And so I would say, hey, that was a situation where we put in, you know, the CEO, he was part of the team. We did all the usual tricks and we came up with this plan, and it worked. A lot of people said, okay, it was basic, but the thing about it is, if you don't actually provide that training, what you get across your organization is that everybody's been a Boy Scout or a Girl Guide or a pack leader in the rugby club or something where, you know, there are deliverables, whether you play well from your skills. They had it, but other people didn't have it because they'd never been part of those organizations. So what you had was a big range in competence of these skills across the organization. And simplistically, as the customers, which were the staff, what the customer always sees is the range. It won't give you good marks. It won't give you good marks for having 10 great guys and 10 so-so guys. He'll see the range. He'll be comparing the good guys to the not so good guys. So basically, I've worked in high tech all my life in terms of some companies which were at the cutting edge of the technology at the time. And I would totally agree with John that if the one skill that was missing and that was not actually trained that well or encouraged that well, the basic problem solving skills that John is talking about. So I can only for practical purposes I can back him up 100% and say that some of the numbers he gives for productivity improvement are probably serious underestimates, you know.
Adam?
Like I normally do, I'm going to throw grenades in and play devil's advocate and things like that I normally do. So, you know, from an entrepreneur's journey, from a size of a business, Steve, you've just been talking about tens of people. We've been talking about CEOs.
Yeah.
But of that 72%, what's the stats behind that? So we know that the majority of manufacturing businesses are probably SMEs, and the majority of them will be 10 and under.
Yeah.
And the majority of them will be managing directors that actually work on the shop floor as well. And for me, there's no excuse around problem-solving skills and the fundamental basics and these fundamental skills that John is talking about. But it's how we actually make the SMEs and the businesses aware of what we're actually able to do, because of these smaller micro SMEs. They are in the thick of it, and the managing director is actually cutting metal in some respects. The majority of them are. So we need to give them, we need to be supporting around this. And some of that is, for me, is around how do we go about that? Because there are a lot of SMEs. The majority of them are micro businesses. So we need to give them the support. It's all right from a big business, because we've probably got the resource, we can do it. So how do we go around that? For me, I got drummed in an early age, for me, in engineering. Be better today than you were yesterday. Plan to be better tomorrow than you are today. It's a quote that it's stuck with me all the way through. But we do need to get this awareness.
There's a project.
Sorry, John, go on.
I reckon those comments are very valid. There's a project on the go in Northamptonshire, which is all about innovation. And the problem is, as you say, the people are able to create and collect some fantastic ideas moving forward. The scale up bit is a real challenge. That journey piece where, like you say, where you can peel away the owner from, and everybody. It's great to be involved in your business, fantastic. But like you say, you can't be planning where you're going to be in 6 months or whatever it might be, because that piece you're going to struggle and trip over yourself. And that was the biggest thing. The biggest challenge for Northamptonshire, for the local economy, was how do we get the scale up? And I think when you say about the skills, I have contention with this, because I'm of the view, as I would say, that I've not found a great deal of publicly funded, whether that be degree course or whatever it is, skills that focus in this particular area. There seems to be a lot of focus on very specific courses or degree courses, which aren't necessarily applicable. A lot of the stuff here, and I make a very clear statement about this. We are not experts in this at all, but what we're looking at is pretty basic skills. These are easy. Those are relatively easy to teach. They don't cost a lot to do. You don't need a 3-year course to do them, because, as Steve says, a lot of them are basic skills on the shop floor that you need. So there's a lack of mechanism, and people like Semlet, dare I say, have absolutely no interest in this whatsoever, which is ironic, because they're an organisation promoting innovation. So they just don't. It doesn't figure to them.
I find it mental. I find it mental because, a really backward sort of like thought process around it. Because, as you say, you've worked with businesses and you've seen the stats around with, same as I have, same as Steve has, same as most of us have, where we can see that there's, even do the smallest little thing can have a massive compound effect on productivity. You spoke about 12% cultural side, getting cultural behaviour right and the culture within the business. 12%, I reckon, from productivity. So these fundamental basics, if you really want to grow not just manufacturing, if you really want to grow the GDP and the economy around this, get it into these SMEs, because that's where you'll
I think
have
we've tried to link it into productivity. Sorry, Steve. As in, what I'm trying to say, move it from the training budget to production budget, and say, if you're going to do this, be more effective, then you can pay for it that way. Sorry, Steve, you were about to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I think one of the areas I've worked a few projects with SMAS, and I've gone into small companies, maybe, and sometimes the MD will be on the shop floor. Normally there's a senior management team, and the ones I've gone into, one of the managers would be on the shop floor making stuff, and the other one was a bit more reflective, and he had me looking at some problem-solving methodology. But one thing I would say is that getting into these companies is the way we approach it. It doesn't take into account the mental attitude and the behaviour of the leaders of these companies, and I think we need to develop a language that a behaviour, and that is that the small organisations like SMAS need to get out and talk to lots of these companies regularly. They do go in, but they don't go in and say. And it's what they say when they go in. In other words, sometimes it can come across as too negative and critical of the MD, and maybe displaying the opportunities that he has to improve, more of shortcomings. a lot of the language that's used isn't that constructive. There are not enough, I'd say, examples of good practice. Whereas a lot of the time, it's a bit hyped up. But in fact, a lot of the time, all you're going in there and doing is giving somebody a bit of confidence to do what they know already, but they haven't had the confidence. So I think we probably need to be able to encourage people like SMAS to just actually go in and say, well, we picked out these 100 companies. We're going to book some time with them and go in and talk to them, and at least give them at least something. Start the conversation, and this will cost you nothing. We'll send Steve in for half an hour or an hour. He'll bring some biscuits if you make the coffee, and let's have a walk around the production line. Let's have a look what we can do, or let's have a look at your weekly meeting, your weekly board of directors meeting. What's on the agenda? And I think sometimes we need to start the conversations at a much lower level, because they tend to start at almost, you stick in 5K, we'll stick in 5K, you get this training. And I think the communication needs to start at, well, can we start to have a conversation about what might be useful to you?
I think some very good points there, Steve. Definitely. Tolu, did you want to come in there?
Yeah. I just thought is related to what Adam was saying about the company culture, and it made me think a lot of companies usually have things that they regard as their company culture, certain words and virtues that they live by. So the first question, in your experience, I'm probably speaking to everyone now, how much do you see manufacturing companies sticking to the set culture that they have in terms of their motto and all these things? When a company can have their motto such as integrity, innovation, and all these things, how much do people toe that line? And plus, can that be used as a guide for developing human skill?
John?
That's a good question. Certainly. Yeah, I mean, I think there's always a danger if something's worked, so let's carry on with it. But I think there's a conflict piece here between when innovation or ideas come into revenue generation. There's always that reluctance because there's a risk associated with it, isn't there? So certainly to move forward and change that piece. I mean, there are some companies that are very good at what they do, and therefore they concentrate, but they're constantly adapting. You look at the most successful business; they are changing, but over time. I guess there are others where there are terrible examples, the sort of Kodaks, etc., where, frankly, everything's all over before they even got to look at what they need to do to change. So, yeah, I guess that comes back down to leadership, doesn't it? Really comes back down to the, what's driving the business, what the objectives at senior level is. That drilled down. If it is, then culture can adjust and business can make those changes accordingly. If it isn't and there's no interest in that, then I think the business is going to struggle. At least my thoughts.
David, did you want to come in?
Okay. Just thinking. Sorry, Adam. I was just thinking that your experience, John, maybe yours too, Adam. When you were talking about SMEs, and I think that's so important at the moment. My background is finance and operations. I'm a qualified accountant from years ago, though I've not been an accountant for some time now. I was talked to a lot of SMEs, and only a few days ago, I was talking to an IT company who have massively grown through the COVID period. They're brilliant. But the MD, who probably never thought he was going to be an MD, is stuck thinking, what do I do now? I'm working in this business so much now, and I really need help to move this thing forward. And he's going to do really well, but he just can't lift himself up. Somehow needs that support. I suppose linked to that, I wonder what you think the LEPs, and you probably alluded to this, Steve, the LEPs and the growth hubs are doing around the country.
Ooh, Adam.
First of all,
keep it clean.
The first one, coming back to you, Tolu, I think in some respects, because obviously I've got Factory IQ, but I've also got the business mentoring side where I deal with SMEs, both manufacturing and in other sectors, as well as the other businesses I have. You've got a family-run business where values are quite very high in what they do with a family business. And then you've got the corporate, and then you've probably got in between that as well. So again, the cultural element, it can be different. Do you know what I mean? From a family business and the values from there against a corporate side and being seen and what they do. And so I think cultural elements, it depends on some of the business around that. But the values and everything do play out in, for me, in the early stages of business, when we recruit and when we grow, we want people that have those same values as we have. But as we add people in, the complexity increases. And skill sets we want and things like that. So there's a whole host of different things I think in there. So quite a big one to come to. The SME side, David, I can't remember exactly what we were saying. You asked around that from.
Yeah, I was wondering about the growth hubs and the labs. What your experience?
Right now, my experience on this, and I know, I think Andrea did a post on this. Is that sometimes they're not that easy to find. They're a bit clunky. I mean, somebody mentioned to me recently in a meeting that why ever did they get away from business links? Now, I never went onto business links because it just fired off. But so I think a lot of it, and again, people ain't got time. If you've got to find, you've got to hunt for something, they ain't got the time to do it. You know, they're running a business, so it's got to be.
It's very bureaucratic.
In my opinion.
Bureaucratic.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think, I mean, John and Steve have had, very similar experiences to the rest of us probably on these, without doubt.
I think what I think is very interesting is that they like ideas as long as they're not new. And I think you're going to struggle with that. You're going to struggle with that. I want unconventional as long as it's conventional. Well, you can't have that. You know, if you're going to tackle these problems, you need to think differently about it. And that's the bit I don't think that there's necessarily focus. Nice reception areas, but they're not necessarily focusing on that piece. I think there's a mismatch of objectives in some respects.
Steve?
I thought Steve was sticking his hand up. Yeah, go on.
There was some interesting data that came out with respect to SMEs, Adam, with respect to productivity in SMEs. And that it was done by the National Bureau of Stats. And one of the things they said was that the most productive SMEs were basically family businesses that had also employed professional management to help them out. Now, I think family businesses can have incredible values, and maybe they're making a good product and making a profit, but they can sometimes, in that space, miss out on productivity. So I would say there is an opportunity. It is not just every SME, but basically the opportunity lies within the SMEs that have never been exposed to professional management. And that is why I think sometimes the what I'm saying, the communication bit can be a bit tricky, because a lot of people will go family businesses and up goes the garlic, because they can be maybe a bit incestuous. They can be difficult to change. But if that's where the data says the problem is, that's where we have to go in and start to try and communicate with people. And I think it's going to require sensitivities to the values of those organizations that are totally different to the values of a multinational. And that is something I just don't think we've looked at it in that level of detail. It's been more along the lines of here's some money that needs to be given out. Let's try and do a good thing with it. Who wants to fill in the forms for the money? Oh, lots of people have filled in. It's been a success. But when you step back after 10 years or something and say, well, okay, how well did we succeed? It shows there's a bit of a gap there. Well, look, that's it. But I don't see any communication that says, or anything on LinkedIn or anything that says, okay, we've recognized this. This is what we're going to do about it. But the solutions are always the same. Fill in a different form and then get your money.
The events are good. They are where you can meet with people. The events that all of these different organisations do, where you can interact and network, I've found them to be really good. You've met some very interesting people there, but they're open-minded people who are because they want to learn something, and that's a really good thing. But like you say, how much time have people got to go to events? If you're on the production line, you haven't got the time with you. Simple as that. It's difficult.
Well, I started out. I started out working on the basis that if I went to a bit of networking and did a bit of stuff around 5, I could a very, very reasonable rate. I thought, sign up some SMEs that I could help. This sort of dream rapidly fell to the ground. I soon got tripped up by this. Because SMEs, they rarely come out. even through things like chambers of commerce and things, trying to get to meet them, it's really, really hard.
I think
So,
we're all in agreement with you on that, Steve.
yeah. So
Today.
yeah, so I've not given up on the dream. I still think there's a massive opportunity there for productivity, for making a bit of money, for a lot of people enjoying their working life a bit more. But it remains a major challenge to actually get into that network.
Yeah, definitely. Well, unfortunately, I've got to bring today's discussion to a close, and it's been really interesting discussion. Like to thank all of our guests for joining us, and of course, thank you to those of you who've commented and asked questions. If you want to connect with John, David, Steve, Tolu, Adam, or myself, we'll drop our contact details in the comments afterwards. As I mentioned earlier, we will be back for another series. But if you do find yourself missing us, you can always binge watch past editions on YouTube. And obviously, if you want to know more about how Connex Portal's working with SMEs in UK manufacturing and how you can get involved, please either contact Sam Bainham or myself. Thank you all for joining us, and see you soon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you. Bye-bye.
Great conversation. Great conversation.
Thank you.